I'm Teresa Carraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. My topic today is hazy days and tinfoil skies, geoengineering, and the attack on the food system. And I'm out here in the bright sunlight in order to share with you this tree. So this is a limequat, a combination between a lime and a kumquat, and it is the most prolific tree I've ever seen. And this year, 2 months ago, was a bumper crop. There were hundreds of fruit on this tree. And then it kept raining, and it kept raining, and it kept raining. And eventually, the fruit rotted on the tree before it even became ripe. And all of this has now fallen off, and you can see I've got dead sticks on the bottom half. So if this is happening to me, what else is happening here in California? And is this an attack on our food system? Over this winter, we've had what they call the atmospheric river, which has been deluges of unprecedented rain. So much that it has wiped out part of the coastline where the roads have fallen right into the ocean. It has broken the levees of farming communities so that they've been entirely flooded. Other coastal cities have lost their entire downtowns. It has been something that we've never seen because we've had years of unprecedented drought. My newlywed daughter, they had on New Year's Eve day 2 inches of rain that came into their downstairs apartment. And my daughter got shocked trying to get electrical appliances up off of the ground, and then they ended up finding that they had black mold halfway up the walls. So things have been crazy around here, and we've never seen anything like this where it's just been relentless. So I want you to keep in mind that name, atmospheric river. We've also had what they call the bomb cyclones, which is a really odd name, wouldn't you say? These are winds that have been whipping through like we never see. We don't get tornadoes or cyclones. We live by the ocean. And another thing we never get is lightning. 2 years ago, in the middle of the summer, there was this crazy wind. I remember being afraid that my windows were going to blow out and just having this thought of something wicked this way comes. And then people were going out to the beach in the middle of the night to watch the lightning that was unprecedented over the ocean and just thinking, well, this is kind of cool, but this does not bode well. And in that same lightning strikes, what they called the CZU lightning complex, it started forest fires all throughout the mountains. So many that it was burning for weeks. And for weeks and weeks, our sun was red. There was a haze that was over the sun. It was so ominous. And everyone was choking outside with the amount that was in the air. I had friends, some who lost their homes, some who thought that they were going to lose their homes and evacuated everything. There were whole towns where they were supposed to just let it burn, and they decided to stand up and join together and create fire breaks, and they took over and saved their town. And of those hundreds of homes that were burnt in those fires, only a very small percentage have been built back. In the meantime, friends of mine who lost their home are paying $5,000 a month in rent, which makes them sick to their stomachs every month, and are trying to buy something but keep getting outbid. And that's by hedge funds. That's by these BlackRock and investors, because they, at this point, bought 33% of the homes last year and are predicted to own 40% of all single-family homes by, I think it's 2025. So this is something that I started wondering about. Is this intentional? Is there a way that that lightning was not normal and that these rains and even the drought has not been normal? As I was looking at that, Ann Gibbons, who does cartoons as Ann Can't Stand It, put up one on geoengineering, and I posted my suspicions in the comments. And then Kitten Seeking Answers did a wonderful post called Kitten Asks, Is This Normal? And she posted various signs and photographs of clouds that were clearly suspicious. And she also put in a link to The Dimming by Dane Wigington. So my screen doesn't cooperate to go high enough, but you can see the beginning of one cloud, which is something that was created by a plane that went by about 15 minutes ago, and you can see how dispersed it is now. There are actually two in the sky now at almost right angles, and nature abhors a corner. Corners don't happen in nature. I saw earlier today one plane that was going by with no trail and the other one that went from across the horizon with a long trail that then dispersed into clouds. I see it every morning now. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. I'll wake up to a beautiful blue sky and then the planes start. And I started wondering, was this commercial planes? Because those shouldn't have it. And then today I was listening to Robert F. Kennedy, who interviewed Dane Wigington on his podcast. And he asked that same question. And Dane said, no, they have retrofitted these planes with the chemtrails, with the chemical dispersions. And so all of these commercial aircraft are doing the same thing. And that doesn't mean that pilots are in on it. It doesn't mean that anyone is knowing about what is happening, but anyone can see it from looking from the outside and who knows how the planes have been retrofitted. In the interview, Robert Kennedy says that he knows intuitively that this is true because one time, many years ago, a decade ago, he was talking with Woody Harrelson, and he said, oh no, that has to be crazy. And Woody took him outside, and they could see, sitting on a hill, a grid of cloud formation that was dispersing to make it into a cloudy day. So that's something that I think we can see with our own eyes. I've just been on the East Coast, and I was close to BWI, Baltimore Washington International. And after I watched The Dimming, the next morning I'm looking at the sky and I'm seeing these two different trails come from different planes at almost right angles. And then I walked away for a few minutes and I came back, and the one had spiraled. It had turned into like a DNA strand. And so looking at one of the things like electromagnetic ways that they end up dispersing these so that they will not look like just one train, but instead will start looking like cloud cover. And what are these trails made out of? Tens of millions of tons is the plan of aluminum nanoparticles. And these are held together with polymer strands so that keeps them dispersed and up in the air for longer. So this is something that is never found in nature, that RFK and Dane talk about how aluminum is something that before World War II didn't exist separate from whatever it is embedded in, that it has to be produced, and it has to be produced with a lot of energy expended. So that's something that started back then, and World War II has been the beginning of the experimentation, so that by the time that Lyndon Johnson came along, he was saying that we can control the weather, and whoever controls the weather controls the world. They talk about how in the 50s there was already an Arctic haze that was being found by Stanford scientists, and that Vietnam era was a time of beta testing a lot of the geoengineering. At this point, the patents are owned by defense contractors, Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, and they have a gag order on the weather meteorologists. So you may have noticed that when you get a weather report, it's all the same. They could be just like those media heads that are all saying the exact same thing. Most of it we're getting online, and no matter which site you go to, it's always predicting the same thing, which is pretty accurate because they're creating it. Kennedy talks about why aluminum is such a dangerous chemical for our body, because it crosses the blood-brain barrier, and that's why it's been implicated in things like Alzheimer's. So we've been trying for naught to keep it out of our armpits and out of our sunscreen, but in the meantime, it's falling on us in the air we breathe, in the water we drink, in the food that we eat. Dane talks about how drought wouldn't be happening naturally with global warming. You might have it in some places, but you wouldn't have it so much in general, because as the air warms up, more of the water is going to precipitate out. But that's the exact opposite of what's happening. So something that they do is create an atmospheric ridge. That was my first clue, that they were calling it that. And that atmospheric ridge can create conditions of drought, even in places where they would ordinarily be having that precipitation, like California. And then I happened to be listening to Matt Ehret, who was being interviewed on Ukraine, and one of the questions was whether Russia was creating unprecedented rainfall in order to use it as a weapon of war and keep Ukraine from being able to mobilize. Now, if that were true, I would have to say that's the gentlest weapon of war that I've heard of. What Matt said is that he didn't know whether that was true, but certainly that was something that in the Middle East 10 years ago they talked about, that Iran talked about how there was unprecedented drought that was being inflicted on them through these atmospheric ridges, and that they were looking to starve their people and disrupt their food supplies because of it. And then Matt says that this can also be used for good. And he describes how in Mexico, what they do is have ionospheric resonances, where they shoot certain frequencies into the ionosphere and create an atmospheric vapor river. And that goes from the coast and brings that into the desert areas. They're not even bothering to change the name. Atmospheric vapor river. And that's described as benevolent. But this, and what's been happening to us, is not benevolent. There are blossoms from the trees that are getting knocked down before they can be pollinated. There are complete flooding of plantings and drowning of the shoots, and days lost from when they need to be able to get those crops in the ground in order to catch the harvest. And I'll end with something from the interview that Robert did of Dane that surprised me and might surprise you. I know there's a lot of criticism of Kennedy that he believes that climate change is a thing. And I suspect that maybe his interview of Dane was in order to offset that, to show that he is not going along with the World Economic Forum and their promotion of things like geoengineering and the entire Great Reset and the way in which climate change has been weaponized in order to get these horrible policies in place. But in this interview, both Robert and Dane agree that climate change is real. And what Dane says is, instead of having something where this happens gradually, what we're heading for is abrupt climate collapse. Because what he says is that we are hiding the symptoms but not the cause. That something that's getting through our atmosphere all the way to the surface are UVC rays, not the UVB rays, and that has never happened before. So all of these things that are very destructive, that are creating blight on trees and killing off 90% of the plankton, those effects are still real. It's just that they're being disguised to keep the game going as long as possible. To follow up this depressing topic, I will certainly have the dimming linked in my Substack version, but I think we need a little hope here. So this is political radicalism and spiritual optimism, and this is what's the best that can happen. Thank you for watching.